Anger is contagious. We are in a time of disruption and chaos, confusion. People are hurting. And for all of my non-African American brothers and sisters in the United States and around the world, I see and hear you in your outrage, in your recognition of the inhumanity, the injustice. I hear you standing up and speaking for what you know is the right thing and what's wrong. And as you are in the midst of such deep feeling of disgust and horror and shock and awe, and you're using your voices in ways that maybe you haven't in your life, I would like for you to take all of the heightened emotional depths of what you're feeling, and then I want you to multiply it times 100. And when you've multiplied it times 100, I then want you to take that emotion and I want you to imagine experiencing this scenario again, and no one cares. No one responds. No one barely bats an eye. And it might be a small blip on the day, but then everyone goes back to their day. I want you to wonder and ask yourself, what would you do with all of that emotion, all of that pent-up anger, being disenfranchised, ignored, marginalized? What would you do with all of that? Where would you put it? Now imagine having to go through that experience half a dozen times in your life, a dozen times in your life, 24 or more. What we're seeing is a perfect storm where so-called leadership is morally and ethically bankrupt, driven by ego and power and lack of empathy, narcissism. We're seeing a pandemic that has rendered many households crippled, not knowing where or how they're going to get back on their financial feet. And then we experience a murder in real time that is so shocking that many of us had to go back and watch the video again because we couldn't really grasp the fact that there were so many people involved that were looking as if this wasn't happening, almost as if it was business as usual. No one lifted a finger to interrupt the taking of this man's life. What do you do with all of that? Now, this is one of the few times where I see that technology and social media can actually lend themselves to something positive and constructive. I call them weapons of mass distraction. But in this instance, there's an opportunity that we all have. I, in my lifetime, do not remember a period of my life where racism was not a part of it. And I'm sure many other African Americans can relate to that sentiment. But I can tell you this, never in my lifetime have I seen so many of my non-African American brothers and sisters stand up and speak out for what is right and stand up against what is wrong. That's the opportunity, the beauty of organized, peaceful protests and taking the anger that can be contagious, but they're turning it into positive anger, constructive anger, putting that energy into rallying the troops, of getting out the message, of identifying those individuals that are perpetrating as protesters, but they're really there to cause and wreak havoc and destruction. They're literally masking their entire bodies and covering their faces so you can't see who they are. They have nothing to do with the mission of peaceful protest. They're there to stir up the pot. They're plants based on someone else's agenda. And I'm seeing those people get identified and filmed on camera. It's a beautiful thing to see all of us coming together. It took an instance of technology exposing it. There's a meme that states racism and these horrific acts have been, they're not new, they're just being filmed. And for the first time, you have a global response. First time in a long time. Dr. King was instrumental in drawing the global eyes on the horrors of racism. Unfortunately, for many of us, not only has this been a way of life, it's been a part of our family lineage. Going back to the Tulsa riots and burning down of Black Wall Street and the lynchings, the strange fruit, as Billie Holiday would sing about, to the organized marches with the hoses and the dogs, to modern day profiling. Going for a jog could cost you your life because the color of your skin has become weaponized and criminalized. A young man wearing a hoodie is attacked and murdered in cold blood without ramification because it wasn't on video. If it had been on video, it would be a totally different outcome. I believe we have an opportunity here to do something incredibly powerful for the betterment of our human race. And I'd never heard of anti-racism training. But one of my friends, who's one of my white sisters, she told me, hey, there's anti-racism training. So I'm learning that there are tools and instruments of self-awareness that we can employ. And we're not going to just let this be a moment where we come together and do some marches and go back to business as usual. No, we're going to grow from this. We're going to get better from this. That's my pledge. I know many of you agree. And I'm looking forward to seeing all of you on the other side of this in a much better and brighter light and greater hope for tomorrow. Peace.